Coming off the heels of a pandemic-fueled election, some Canadian businesses are hoping for success after nearly 2 years of declines. But the pandemic has not only affected businesses within Canada, it has impacted businesses around the world and the globalization of companies. So what does the future of Canadian business look like following the events of the pandemic? With us to talk about Canadian business and the future of globalization is Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, always great having you on Forum Daily. Welcome back.
Thank you, Nima. Glad to be here.
So let's start with a quick overview of what exactly globalization is.
Depends who you ask. To some, it is the exporting of the dark satanic mills that William Blake wrote about. It's about how we export all of our manufacturing and human rights abuses to other countries, and then we just enjoy the fruits of their unholy labors. To others, and this is what I think we've seen in the last half century, it has been a way that countries all over the world that had been poverty stricken have enabled themselves through a greater manufacturing base to haul themselves out of poverty and allow for both the absolute efficient and relative efficiency in economies where goods are manufactured where it is most efficient to do so, and a increasingly interlinked communication system has allowed those goods to travel all over the world, everything from auto parts to computer chips. So depends who you ask, but it's trade around the world, if you had to put it in just a few words.
All right, Brendan. Well, prior to this pandemic, we had been living in a world where products and manufacturing has been shipped throughout the world, almost as if there were no borders stopping them. Now with COVID-19 in play, what has happened to globalization?
Well, there was a move afoot, as I alluded to in my last question, against this globalization. Some of it has been human rights led, some of it has been union led, some of it has been just business led, because to the extent that goods are manufactured in other countries, they still have to get here. And while there is open and free communication and transport, that's been a good thing. But with COVID, because of different countries being locked down and communication systems not being what they had been, and frankly, just the level of trust between countries has regrettably also plummeted. We have seen a greater difficulty getting everything from Lime Diet Coke to the chips that power our cell phones transported from other countries.
So would you say the pandemic has maybe reversed globalization?
It has. It has. That is the short answer. Whether that reverse is permanent or temporary remains to be seen, but it has certainly caused companies to rethink their supply lines, their supply chain, and where they get their goods from and how.
And taking a deeper look at supply chains themselves, they've been disrupted during the pandemic. We're seeing products either slowly not being replaced on shelves or becoming very expensive. So what does all of this mean for consumers, Brendan?
Well, you've seen it. The prices have gone up. From the early days of the pandemic, you didn't see prices rise so much as you saw assets rise. The amount of money pumped into the system caused asset inflation, everything from French wines to stocks to real estate. We've talked about that. Now we're seeing inflation in goods and services because it is harder to get things from elsewhere. Basic materials like copper has made it difficult to create everything from pressure hoses to copper wire that goes into electronics. So we are seeing inflation actually hit consumers where it matters now.
And all of this is impacting international trade. We're seeing more corporations deciding to manufacture within their own country, as you mentioned. So how would all of this change employment, or would a lot of this work be outsourced to robots?
Well, I think it'll be interesting. Yes, I think some of manufacturing now, when more manufacturing is done in North America, and more manufacturing will be done in North America because we cannot clearly rely on supply lines from overseas. I think more of it will be automated. It means that it will require a different, higher tech workforce than what perhaps was in place before. So it will mean more jobs, but it might not mean more jobs for the same people that hold the old jobs. So there will be continued disruption in the labor force. I think the good news for companies is that their supply may be more reliable, and for countries that they are less dependent overseas. That's the good news. I think the bad news potentially is when we were globalized and we relied on each other for goods, there was a greater degree of trust. There was a greater degree of necessity for us to have to get along. Now, when we become more self-reliant, we ask ourselves, well, why do we need you? And there is less cooperation on other things that matter globally. And that would be my biggest concern about the future post COVID.
Some very interesting points there, Brendan. Always great having you on the show. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Nima.